Welcome to the search bar, where we're answering the question, will ChatGPT replace Google search? So Google's dominated the search game for decades, but AI platforms like ChatGPT, Gemini, Grok, and Perplexity are on the rise, obviously. These platforms still rely on website content, but they pull it directly into the page in the form of an answer. So Melissa and I were talking about this earlier. Melissa, will AI results like this start to take over and change the game? Are people going to start to do web searches in platforms like ChatGPT instead of Google?
I don't think so right now. Looking at the data as to how users are interacting with those platforms right now, and now granted, it's really most of us who even understand them and know what they really are doing that are going in and searching on those platforms. But I think the type of search and the type of result that happens in an AI platform is different than what you would normally use Google or a traditional search engine for.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where it might be additive to your search rather than taking away from your traditional research approach. So, and we've seen things like that, like right now, even when OpenAI had first released, when Perplexity had come out and a few others, Google actually hasn't seen a decrease in market share or a decrease in searches because of those releasing. Ironically, it's actually seen a little bit of a bump.
Yeah.
Who knows why that's attributed to that. But I also think there are things too where not everybody really trusts AI and those platforms right now. And so you might see some results. And if they're more of a traditional informational result, you might not know if you can trust it. So then you probably hop over to Google to validate, is this really the right answer? Rather than just relying straight on the directions or the information that you're given there. But speaking of directions, I do think that's where users tend to navigate more towards an AI platform for some of those types of results, where they're just looking for how-tos, how do I fix something, or something that has a mathematical equation behind it, or something that might give you you just need one answer in an immediate kind of format, rather than something where you know that you want the option and the opportunity of choice.
Yeah, a real quick answer might be something you go to. A quick answer on something that's not particularly controversial is something you might go to AI for, whereas if you want to have an experience, if you want a more in-depth answer, if you want to experience it on a different platform, if you want it beyond just text and sometimes an image, than Google. And obviously Google has had decades to establish itself. People generally know how it works. It has, in most people's eyes, at least some measure of credibility, where like you said, all these chat and AI platforms are a little more unknown. Mm-hmm. AI definitely has a bad rap in many ways in the news. And I mean, we're fairly early in AI generative content. There's clearly issues a lot of the times when you do a search in AI.
Yeah. And the original question being, is it going to replace Google or something of that sort? I mean, right now the data doesn't say that, but to your point, we are very early on into this process. The other thing too that's kind of interesting to think more broadly about this is, well, what happens if legislation comes through and says, hey, we're actually Google, we're going to break you up in these certain formats. And one of the formats would be that you have to give more potential for other search engines to exist within this market rather than it just being monopolized by you, Google. So that will then create a really interesting mix-up within the search engine market if that were to happen.
That would be a big game changer. And as of the recording of this, that is something that could happen because the Department of Justice is currently considering what to do there.
They threw it out as an option.
And so obviously that would be a huge game changer. But it is interesting. I mean, we're a couple of years into this whole generative AI thing, as started at least by ChatGPT. And ChatGPT is crazy. It's incredible. People use it all the time, but it only has 2% of the monthly traffic that Google has. I mean, Google's still a giant. Like you said, it hasn't really hurt Google's traffic or anything like that. But I mean, Google knows it's coming, and Google is also playing around with AI results in its search.
Yeah.
So it's trying to embrace it in some degree.
Yeah. And I mean, when you think about it from a user perspective, it is actually better to go into a search engine if you're looking for something where there's just like one answer. So like I think back to the days, I know like all of the sports networks really had a fight with this with Google. But if you wanted to know what is the score of the Chiefs versus the Bills game, you just want to know the answer. You don't want all the hoops to have to jump to get there. So that coming through onto Google search engine result pages back in the day, that was great.
Yep.
Terrible for all of those sports publications where they relied on that traffic coming to their site so that users would get served ads and everything else. But from a user perspective, it was better for us. So it's going to be interesting to figure out how Google takes something of that nature, which we used to think of them as rich snippets or rich results, and moves over into the AI overviews perspective where they're trying to answer even more things in a more concise approach. And that's something that they have seen it. There's actually a study, I forget who had done it, but there was a study that had surveyed people to read AI content versus human written content for very particular types of queries and questions. And kind of what came from it is that it wasn't always that AI written content was better, except clearly in one way. It was the brevity. AI got to the answer faster without a lot of extra fluff or exhortation that was around it. So, and I think that's because for a long time, those of us who are used to writing content, whether it was in school and they're like, we need a 2,000 word essay from you to, back in the day when you might get something from an SEO and it's like, we need 3,000 word minimum. You're like, how am I going to fill all of this? You filled it with fluff rather than like true information, like the meat of the actual story. My reference is I call it the blah, blah, blah. It's when you start reading and you get to a point, you're like, blah, 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 scroll, scroll, scroll. And you're looking for something else on the page. And that's what AI does a bit better than humans do right now. And I think that's just because we need to unwind some of the learnings or some of the directions we've been given in the past.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. There's nothing wrong with having a lot of content on a page, a really long video. But when a human is writing it on the web, it's usually best to get to the point right away. Be really clear about what the point is. Don't make people walk through it for a long time. And use really good like H1s, 1H1, H2s throughout, H3s, like make it
structure.
Scannable. Yeah, give it structure. Make it scannable for bots and scannable for humans. That's really important. But you're right. Yeah, AI does a good job with that. That's a great point.
I also think what's coming in the future where AI doesn't really have a great handle on it, and Google is making more strides towards this, and this is where some of more of your social search platforms already have this down really well, is content doesn't just mean text. For the longest time, we've always thought of content as being like what is in a written form, a web page or something of that sort. But instead, like people don't search just to read text anymore. In a lot of cases, we want videos. We want to hear from people. We want to see people. This is where a lot of the fake news and everything that's kind of come from that bubble has exploded into our world of like, how do we trust people? Now, there are AI formats that can create videos. And so I'm sure there will be something done with that in the future. But for right now, OpenAI and, Meta and X and all these other bigger companies that are creating AI platforms to go along with their traditional platforms, they're not exploring that. They're only exploring it in a text format right now, at least to give it to us from a search engine perspective.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think video often shows authenticity. If it's a real person, they're saying what they actually think. They're not being paid by a big sponsor or anything like that. They're not a big corporation. They're not a news organization. And therefore, they come about more trustworthy.
Yeah. And I think that's the fight that's going to always continue to be, not just now, but in the future, even more so, is what is real? What is authentic? What can I really trust? There's actually a little cultural phenomenon that's going on right now in social platforms, which is I lovingly call I ran to the comments. And that is because users will go through and they'll read or they'll be watching something, or like they'll go to an Amazon, product page, but they will flip all the way down to the reviews, all the way down to the comments on social.
Yep.
And they'll start to read what other people are saying because they actually don't want to just trust one person.
Yep.
They want to see the wide variety of different people with different backgrounds, how they interacted with the product or how they interacted with the service to determine whether it has validation behind that or not, whether to trust that. So it might be an authoritative person talking on a video about how something is really great, but a product is really great, but you'll still run to the comments to see what everybody else's validation of that is. So it's a really interesting take on what's kind of coming from that, and how we might see that information get handed over to us to make our decisions on what content we'll actually trust in the future.
It's like the rise with all the technology, the rise with AI generated content and everything. There's also a rise of hunger for authenticity.
Yeah, because you don't know what to trust.
Okay, so you work with a lot of big brands. You have worked with a lot of big brands. Do you feel like big brands are concerned about these AI platforms? They want to appear on these AI platforms. They look at them as other places where they want their brand to have a voice?
I haven't had or spoken to any current clients that have been asking about that yet. Although I have been kind of telling them they should start to be thinking about this.
Yeah.
And it's not just from an SEO perspective of where I have this interest of where, things might rank, right? Like you show up as answers, but really from just a full marketing background. If you want to have your brand or have your company show up as an answer to something, as a trusted result in any of the platforms, then you have to be thinking of a much bigger marketing plan than just optimizing a website for Google. Like, what does that look like? I do think there are some bigger companies who are starting to get more interested in what does that future look like. I think Condé Nast had actually just struck a deal with OpenAI as being a training model, a part of that training model with their content, which is a really interesting first step. And that's happening there because, New York Times had taken the step of actually suing and putting a lawsuit against OpenAI. So it's like, is it
embrace it or fight it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Which way do you go?
Right.
Because, so I think the long-term bet is that there will be some sort of traffic that will come from Search GPT. That's what they're, playing with in the future. So I don't know. I mean, it's an interesting new world that we're in where you have the open web kind of conflicting against proprietary information and intellectual property, and like where we're really colliding in those two worlds right now. And what does it mean to either be there for your potential future of traffic or brand authority, or gains in brand marketing, to not having that out there, but standing on your own, which I do agree with that. Like, it is your content that you created to begin with, but what's the equal balance? Yeah.
We work with some small clients, with some medium-sized clients, with some Fortune 500 clients. So we have a really wide variety. We work with clients in many different industries. And I would say all of them are interested in AI and what it means for their brands. But just a few of them are interested in like showing up in AI. I think most organizations out there are interested in it. They wonder what it means for their website, but they're not quite sure what to do about it.
Well, it comes down to, how do you quantify it? What is it actually going to do for you? Because it's going to take a lot of work to get into those AIs. Yeah. Like the way that the generative AI process works, it's going to take more than just creating a web page. And as an example, you're going to have to do a lot more social work. You're going to have to do a lot more, your own channels, and even from a paid perspective, do a lot of work, which is honestly the whole traditional marketing background from a digital perspective of making sure your brand is known, and how do you get, likes, mentions, citations. If you think of it from a local perspective, your NAP getting out there.
Yep.
And so that's a lot of work, and none of these businesses are quite sure what it's going to give them for all of that effort.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's so many things that one can do to prepare one's online presence and website for more of the emergence of generative AI. But one of the things we tell clients is, well, Google's great, continue to get great traffic from Google, but you got to think of these other things too. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. And just having a really, really solid online presence, being on the proper platforms for your brand, having a consistent message and branding throughout, having a really solid website that has really helpful, great content, the right images, having video strategy as well, having like schema code on your site, having a really fast, the user experience, just all these things, no matter what happens in the future, is going to be good for your brand. Make it really helpful for humans that come to see your brand, make it really valuable, but also make it really accessible for search engines and bots and things like that too.
Yeah, I mean, the number one most winning SEO strategy as of today, with the way that the algos are running out right now and what we learned from the Google leak, is to have a really great full marketing plan.
Yeah. Yep.
Because brand authority is a really big piece in what actually shows up in Google's rankings. I mean, and the other thing too is there's a newer study that's also come out that says to show up in the AI overview within Google, it's actually just taking the summation of all of those who are ranking in the top 10. And Google had fixed that because it used to be a little bit more random, and that's where you got a lot of strange results. And so coming back to saying, okay, we can rely on the top 10 to be really good results. So that's also what we're going to use in AI overviews. So to rank in the top 10 comes down to really good, strong SEO. But again, from the Google leak, we learned that brand authority and mentions and how your information gets throughout not just a website or a web page, but how it is on social, what it's like on YouTube, what it's like on TikTok,
reviews,
what it's like on
everything.
Amazon, all across the entire World Wide Web. And even those individual app platforms, all of that is taken into consideration to understand how users interact with that brand to know which ones are trustworthy. I mean, Google's even beta testing like a blue little checkbox in the SERPs right now, just like you would see like on LinkedIn or on X, where it's saying like, this is a verified person or verified user. It's the same thing. Like this is a website you can trust type of notification. So it's interesting to see how Google's picking up on how audiences are responding and then bringing in things to help them understand that, these are trustworthy results.
Yeah. Absolutely. We could talk about that forever, but we'll leave it there. We hope that was helpful for you. Please like and subscribe. Thanks, and we'll talk to you next time.